Hello and welcome back to Le Crime Noir. Before we begin, feel free to leave a comment and tell me where you're listening from. I always enjoy reading them. If you're drawn to dark, haunting stories, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel. Now, settle in, clear your mind, let the outside world slip away. And let's begin. Story 1. I used to work at a self-storage facility, and one of the first things they drilled into me during training was simple: always carry a map. They said it like it was a safety rule, like wearing gloves or keeping your keys on you. At the time, I thought it was kind of ridiculous. How do you get lost in a 2-story building full of hallways? It sounded like something they told new employees just to make the place seem more complicated than it really was. Then I started working there, and I understood why they kept saying it. Those buildings don't feel like normal buildings once you're inside them for a while. From the outside, a storage place looks like a box. Inside, it's like the hallways curl back in on themselves. You think you're walking in a straight line, but you end up at a door you swear you've already passed. The corners feel too similar. The metal doors all look the same. Even the air feels the same everywhere, like it never fully changes from one section to the next. During my first week, I was doing a basic walkthrough on my own. I had a cart with cleaning stuff, a trash grabber, paper towels, and a ring of keys that felt way too heavy for someone who still felt like a kid. I remember thinking I'd just circle the building once, get familiar with the layout, and be back at the office in 10 minutes. Instead, I kept turning and somehow landing in the same stretch of hallway again. I'd look down one corridor and see the same door numbers I had just seen. I'd walk past the same corner and notice the same scuff on the wall. I'd tell myself I must have made a wrong turn, so I'd pick a different direction. And then I'd see it again, like the building had only a few pieces, and it kept rearranging them when I wasn't looking. There was also this smell that came and went as I walked. Not just the usual dusty storage smell, but something worse. It reminded me of sawdust mixed with old food, like someone had spilled a bag of dog kibble somewhere years ago and it just sat there. Every now and then I'd pass through a pocket of it, and I'd slow down and look around, thinking I'd find a leaking unit or a trash pile. But it never had a clear source. I couldn't point to a door and say, it's coming from that one. It was just there. And then it was gone again. Eventually, I found an elevator and managed to get back to the office, but it took me close to 30 minutes. 30 minutes in a building I had been told was small. I remember laughing a little when I stepped behind the counter, but it wasn't a real laugh. It was the kind you do when you're unsettled and you want to act like you're not. The feeling that stuck with me wasn't just confusion. It felt like I was being played with. Like the building had let me wander until it got bored and decided to spit me back out where I needed to be. The store I worked at most of the time was one of the smaller ones in the area, around 300 spaces, and some of them were outside units you could drive up to. It wasn't a big, busy place. A lot of the day was routine. You did your rounds, picked up trash, checked for abandoned locks, made sure nobody had propped open a side door, and you kept an eye out for leaks or pests. A lot of the time I was alone, especially early in the morning or later in the evening. Honestly, I liked that part. I've always been the kind of person who talks to myself without noticing, and working alone gave me space to do it without feeling weird. I'd talk through what I was doing, complain about customers who ignored the no food rules, make little jokes to myself. After a while, I even started talking to the building like it could hear me. Not in a serious way at first, more like, all right, you and me again, when I pushed my cart into another hallway. Or, okay, don't start with me today, when a door would stick. It was just something to pass the time, and for the most part, it was peaceful. The silence in storage buildings is a special kind of quiet. It's not like a library, it's heavier. It feels like the sound gets trapped behind all those metal doors. The really odd stuff didn't start until I helped out at another location. My manager asked if I could cover a shift at one of the bigger stores because they were short-staffed. I said yes, because I wanted the hours and because I was 19 and thought saying yes to everything made me look dependable. They warned me it was a larger building, but I didn't understand what that meant until I walked into it. This place was huge, almost 600 units, 4 floors, all inside. The hallways felt longer, and the layout was worse, like it had been designed by someone who thought confusing customers was a bonus feature. My map felt useless almost immediately. The building had these strange dead-end hallways, little nooks and weird cutouts that went nowhere, and turns that led you right back to where you started without you noticing how you got there. On top of that, the elevator had double doors that opened in 2 directions, which sounds like a small thing until you're tired and trying to keep track of where you are. You'd get out on the 3rd floor and the doors would open to a hallway that looked familiar, and you'd swear you were on the wrong side of the building. Then you'd take the elevator back down and the doors would open the other way. And suddenly, you were in a totally different corridor than you expected. That morning, my rounds took nearly an hour and a half. Not because I was doing extra work, but because it took that long to cover everything and still find my way back. In the office, there was a stack of notes left for me by that store's manager. Most of it was normal. Reminders about lock checks, a unit that needed a new hasp, a tenant who always left junk outside their door. But one note stood out. It said, in simple handwriting, that if I felt uncomfortable, I should avoid doing a nightly round. That line stuck with me. I read it twice. At the time, I assumed they meant the location was in the middle of nowhere. The store really was out in the boonies, and we did have problems with homeless people sometimes. They'd climb the outside walls and sleep inside empty outdoor units, especially in bad weather. I'd seen that at other places too, more times than I wanted to. It was always sad and awkward, and sometimes it was dangerous. So I told myself that's what the note was about. Human problems, real problems. And I was 19. I thought of myself as tougher than I was. I didn't want to be the kid who got spooked and skipped parts of the job. So when the afternoon started sliding toward evening and the place got quieter, I decided I was doing the nightly round like normal. It was around 6 p.m. when I started. The first floor went fine. I had mostly figured out the layout by then, and I could use the office door as a landmark. As long as I could find my way back to that, I knew I wasn't totally turned around. I picked up the usual trash, wrappers, empty soda bottles, a couple of fast food bags stuffed into corners like someone thought the building was their personal dumping ground. The second floor was smooth too. Same routine, same kind of mess. A few tenants had left food-related trash, even though the signs were everywhere. It annoyed me, but it was normal. I told myself the manager's note was probably just company policy. Better safe than sorry. Then I got to the 3rd floor, and the whole feeling changed. It wasn't one big, obvious thing. It was a bunch of small things stacked on top of each other until it felt wrong. Some of the overhead lights were out. Instead of the regular fluorescent glare, sections of the hallway were lit by red emergency lights. That alone was creepy, but not unheard of. Bulbs burn out. Electrical issues happen. What got me was the smell. Earlier in the day, the building had smelled like it always did. Dust, metal, a little bit of mildew in places. Now there was a strong, sharp smell like rat poison, that chemical kind of smell that makes the back of your throat feel tight. I stopped and looked around, expecting to see a pest control box or some kind of spill, but there was nothing. No open container, no maintenance cart, no warning sign. It felt like the smell had just appeared, like it had been released into the air when nobody was watching. I tried to keep it light in my own head. I told myself maybe pest control had been there and the smell was lingering. I kept moving, replaced what I could replace, and made a mental note about the dead bulbs. I'll admit it, too, there was a childish part of me that thought breaking burnt-out bulbs was satisfying. Not with my hands, obviously, but you know what I mean. There's a weird relief in finishing off something that's already dead. By the time I finished the third floor, I was a little tense, but I still didn't think I was in danger. I was more annoyed than scared. I just wanted to finish up and get back to the office. Then I went up to the fourth floor. The elevator ride itself is the part I still remember the clearest. The doors closed. The elevator started going up. It made the normal humming sound for a few seconds, and then the whole thing jolted hard. Not a gentle shake like an old elevator settling, but a sudden, heavy jolt that made my stomach drop. The walls rattled. I grabbed the handrail without even thinking. It shook again as it reached the top, and when the doors opened, I stepped out into darkness. Not dim light. Not a few bulbs are out. The entire floor was dark. No emergency red lights. No glowing exit sign nearby. Just a black hallway that swallowed the little bit of light that came from the elevator. And there was a sound. At first I couldn't place it. It was low and stretched out, like something twisting. The closest thing I can compare it to is rusted metal being bent slowly, the way it complains when you force it. It wasn't constant either. It came in long, strained bursts, like the building was groaning in a different language. Every instinct in my body told me to turn around. So I did. I spun right back toward the elevator and pressed the button. Nothing happened. I pressed it again, harder, like my finger could force it to work. The doors didn't close. The panel didn't light up. It was like the elevator had decided it didn't care anymore. I told myself it was a blackout. That's what I wanted it to be. Something simple. Something explainable. But my skin was already prickling, and the air on that floor felt different, stale and cold, like it hadn't been disturbed in a long time. I decided to head for the emergency stairs. I knew there had to be a stairwell somewhere. Buildings like that always have them. The problem was, on that floor, I couldn't find anything. I couldn't even get my eyes to adjust properly. I held my hands out a little as I walked, feeling stupid and exposed at the same time. I took one turn, then another, trying to remember the layout from the map. But the map in my pocket might as well have been a drawing of a different building. Every turn I made felt wrong. The hallways didn't line up with what I expected. A corridor that should have led to a corner kept going. A door that should have been on my left wasn't there. And then I heard breathing. It was close enough that it sounded like it was in the hallway with me, not far away behind a door. It was rough and raspy, like someone struggling to pull air through their throat. The sound made my own breathing hitch, and for a second, I couldn't move. I called out, trying to sound firm, trying to sound like an employee and not a scared teenager in the dark. Hello? Is someone there? No answer. Just the breathing, steady and ugly, like it wasn't even trying to hide. I stood there listening, waiting for it to stop or for someone to speak. Nothing changed. The longer it went on, the more certain I became that it wasn't echoing through vents or coming from a unit. It sounded like it was right there, a few steps behind me, breathing on purpose. I tried to tell myself it could be a homeless person. That would still be bad, but at least it would be real. At least it would follow rules I understood. But something about that breathing didn't sound human. It sounded too dry, too slow, like it had learned how to imitate the idea of breathing. Then I heard footsteps. Not mine. Mine were soft and careful, because I was trying not to trip. These were heavier, measured, and they stopped when I stopped. They started when I started. The timing was too perfect, like whatever it was had decided to match me exactly. My chest tightened instantly, and not just from fear. I have asthma, and when panic hits me, it hits my lungs too. The air felt thick, and every breath started to feel like work. I took a few faster steps, then realized I was basically speeding up for the thing behind me. I broke into a run. In the dark, running feels insane, but standing still felt worse. My cart was long gone, forgotten the second the elevator didn't work. I ran down the hallway, turned a corner, then another, and the building seemed to stretch out in front of me. It felt like a maze that was growing while I moved through it. The sound of footsteps stayed with me. I couldn't tell if it was getting closer or if it was just inside my head now, but either way, it didn't leave. My breathing got worse fast. I could feel the tightness spreading across my chest, like a band being pulled tighter and tighter. I tried to slow down, tried to control my breath, but anxiety and asthma together don't care what you want. I pulled around a corner and stopped, pressing my back against the wall in the dark. My hands shook as I dug through my pockets. Keys, phone, gloves, then finally, my inhaler. I brought it to my mouth and took a rescue breath, then another. The inhaler was nearly empty, and that was its own kind of fear. But a couple of small puffs still came out. I held my breath like you're supposed to, then let it out slowly, trying to get air back into my lungs without wheezing. For a few seconds, I just stood there, listening. The footsteps were gone. The breathing was gone too. That silence was almost worse, because it felt like whatever had been behind me had simply stopped making noise, not stopped existing. I leaned forward and looked around the corner as slowly as I could. I expected to see a person, a shape, a shadow, anything. There was nothing. The hallway was empty darkness, no movement, no sound, no light. I stayed there a moment longer, trying to calm down enough to move. I told myself to get to the stairs, find the exit. Don't think about anything else. Just get out. When I started walking again, I kept one hand on the wall, using it like a guide. I turned when the wall turned. I counted corners in my head. I listened for any change in sound. Every few steps, I thought I heard something behind me. But when I stopped, there was only my own breath and the faint groan of the building. It felt like it took forever, but it was probably about 10 minutes before I finally saw the outline of a door and the faintest suggestion of light around its frame. I pushed it open so hard it banged against the wall, and hot summer air hit my face like a wave. I have never been so relieved to feel warm air. I stepped out and didn't even look back right away. I just stood there, breathing, letting my lungs catch up, letting my heartbeat slow down. Then I snapped back to reality and pulled the door shut behind me. I locked it. I didn't care about my cart. I didn't care about finishing the round. I didn't care if someone wrote me up. All I cared about was getting away from that floor, away from that building. My hands were shaking so badly I fumbled my phone, but I managed to call my mom. The second she answered, my voice broke. I tried to explain what had happened, but it came out messy. Dark floor, elevator, breathing, getting lost, not being able to breathe. She kept talking to me in that steady way moms do when they know you're about to fall apart. She told me to sit down. She told me I was okay. She told me to keep breathing. I stayed on the phone with her while I found the stairwell and climbed down all 4 flights. Every step down felt like escaping something that might change its mind and come after me. By the time I reached the office, I was exhausted, like I'd been running for hours instead of minutes. I didn't tell the manager everything. I didn't have the right words for it. I said the 4th floor was dark and the elevator wasn't working, and I didn't feel safe finishing the round. Nobody argued with me. Nobody acted surprised. That should have been my first clue that the note in the office hadn't been about homeless people at all. I never helped out at that store again. I avoided it completely. If they needed coverage, I made an excuse. If someone asked why, I kept it simple. Eventually, I left that job altogether. But it didn't leave me. Sometimes I still dream about it, and the dream always feels the same. I'm back in that elevator. There's a jolt. The door's open. The hallway is waiting, black and silent, like it's been holding its breath just for me. And somewhere in that dark, something starts breathing again, slow and raspy, like it remembers me. Story 2. The first thing Elias Thorne learned to hate was the smell. It was the smell of places where people were cleaned up after something terrible happened. Sterilized linoleum with that sharp, biting chemical sting. Flowers left on counters that were supposed to bring comfort, but instead just slowly rotted in warm rooms. Dying lilies were the worst. Their sweetness turned sour after a day or two, and the scent hung in the air like a reminder that nothing stayed pure for long. Elias would walk into clinics, shelters, and hospital wings and feel that smell settle into his clothes, into his hair, into his lungs, as if the building itself was breathing it into him. At first, he told himself it didn't bother him. He told himself that if he was going to help people, he had to accept the places where pain lived. He had to sit in waiting rooms with flickering lights. He had to stand in hallways where you could hear strangers crying through half-closed doors. He had to learn to keep his face steady when a teenager described what happened behind a locked bedroom door, or when a mother explained how she found her son in the bathtub with the water still running. Elias didn't start out as a monster. That part mattered, even if no one believed it later. He started out as a man who cared too much, a man who looked at broken people and saw something worth saving. He was a trauma counselor in the city's roughest district, the area most people only drove through with their car doors locked. The buildings were old and crowded, the sidewalks cracked and crowded too, and the air smelled like hot asphalt in summer and wet trash in winter. Elias worked in a small office attached to a community center that had peeling paint and a security guard who knew everyone by their first name. Most days, Elias didn't do anything dramatic. He listened. He asked questions in a calm voice. He offered tissues. He taught breathing exercises and grounding techniques. He helped people fill out paperwork. He sat with them in silence when words ran out. He watched them shake, rage, laugh at the wrong moments, and then apologize for it like grief needed manners. He believed, with a kind of bright, stubborn hope, that no soul was beyond repair. It wasn't just professional optimism. Elias truly believed it. He believed people could change. He believed there was light inside human beings, even if it was buried deep under fear and shame. He believed in second chances and third chances. He believed that if he stayed present long enough, if he didn't look away, if he didn't get tired of the worst parts of people, something good would grow. And he believed in God, not in a loud way. Elias wasn't the sort of man who stood on street corners with a sign. His faith was quiet. It was the steady kind. The kind that made you show up to work. The kind that made you sit with someone who smelled like alcohol and sweat and still treat them like they mattered. He believed in a watchful God and a universe that made sense, even when it hurt. He used to say it to his clients sometimes, gently, when they asked him how he did this job without falling apart. "I don't think we're meant to carry it alone," he would tell them. "I think there's help. Maybe not always in the way we want, but it's there." For years, that belief held. Then came the tenement fire. People in the district still talked about it like it was a living thing, as if the fire had a name and a personality. A bad spirit, an open mouth, a hungry god made of smoke and heat. It happened on a cold night when the wind made everything sharper. The building was one of those old tenements that should have been condemned years ago, but no one with power wanted to look too closely at it because the tenants were poor and the landlord was connected. Elias had been working with a family who lived on the third floor, 5 of them in a space that was too small. A mother, a father, and 3 children. The kids were bright in a way that made your chest ache. The youngest loved to draw. She would sit in Elias's office with her tongue between her teeth, concentrating hard, then proudly hand him pictures of stick figure angels with big wings. "Those are the ones that watch the building," she told him once. Elias smiled and told her they were beautiful. He kept the drawings in a folder on his desk. He meant to show them to his wife later. He meant to tell her that for all the ugliness in the world, there were still children who drew angels because they wanted to believe in someone watching over them. The night of the fire, Elias wasn't even on the clock. He heard about it because his phone wouldn't stop buzzing. Messages from coworkers, a news alert, someone yelling outside his apartment building, the sound carrying up the street. He drove there without thinking, as if his body moved on its own. By the time he arrived, the street was already full of lights. Red and blue flashed against the brick walls. Smoke rolled out of windows in thick waves, and flames pulsed behind the glass like something alive. People stood everywhere, some barefoot, some wrapped in thin blankets. They stared up at the building with faces that didn't look real. Firefighters moved like shadows in heavy gear. Water arced through the air and vanished into steam. Elias pushed through the crowd, calling out names he didn't want to say. He knew what he would find before he found it, but he couldn't stop himself. Someone grabbed his arm and told him to stay back. Police tape blocked the way. Elias ended up behind it, frozen in place, watching. And then he heard the screaming. It wasn't one scream, it was many. A terrible mix that came through the roar of the fire and the shouted commands. High voices, low voices, the kind of sound that gets into the bones. Elias looked for the family. He looked for the mother's face, for the father's broad shoulders, for the children who had once sat in his office and drawn angels. He didn't see them in the crowd. He tried to move forward again, but officers held the line. Their faces were set, hard with the knowledge of what was happening inside. The exits, Elias learned in pieces, were chained shut. Chained shut. At first, his mind didn't accept it. It didn't fit any world that made sense. It didn't fit the rules Elias believed in. A landlord could be greedy, yes. Neglectful, yes. But chaining the exits, locking human beings inside a burning building like animals, was something Elias couldn't place inside the idea of humanity he'd built his life on. Someone nearby said the landlord wanted to save on insurance. Another person said he'd done it before and been warned. Someone else started sobbing and kept repeating, "They can't get out. They can't get out. They can't." Elias stood behind the police tape, listening to the people he had promised to help. He had told the mother that things could get better. He had told the father that the system moved slowly, but it moved. He had told those children that they were safe now, that people were trying. Now, he heard them screaming, and he couldn't move. Smoke turned from gray to thick, greasy black. It pushed out into the night like a poison. The flames brightened, and the windows glowed. Elias could see shapes moving behind curtains for a moment. Then nothing. The screams didn't stop right away. They went on long enough for Elias to start shaking. They went on long enough for him to whisper prayers into the air like throwing pebbles into a river. Please, please, please. Then the screaming ended. Not because it was resolved, but because there was no more breath left. In that moment, something in Elias's mind broke with a sound that felt real, not a metaphor. He heard it, clear and sharp, like dry wood snapping under pressure, like tinder breaking in the wind, like a small final crack in the center of his chest. He went home hours later with smoke in his hair and ash on his sleeves. He didn't remember the drive. His hands were steady on the wheel, but he felt like he wasn't fully inside his body. He kept seeing the windows. He kept hearing that sound, the ending of all those voices at once. That night, he went to his church. It wasn't far, a small stone building wedged between businesses that were closed and dark. Elias had gone there his whole adult life, and when he pushed open the gate, he expected the familiar calm to meet him. He wanted the peace that passes understanding. He wanted a quiet sanctuary, candlelight, the sense that someone was listening. The doors were locked. A sign was taped to the front, renovation. Services temporarily moved. Check website for details. Elias stared at the paper as rain began to fall, the kind of thin, cold rain that soaks you quickly. He knocked anyway. Once. Twice. Harder, like the wood might change its mind and let him in. No one answered. He sank onto the stone steps. The rain dampened his hair and darkened his clothes, but he barely noticed. He bowed his head and whispered prayers into the dark. He didn't ask for miracles. He didn't ask for the dead to come back. He asked for something smaller and, somehow, harder. He asked for meaning. Why would God allow something like that? Why would the world be built in a way that let a person chain exits and sleep at night? Why would children draw angels and then die screaming? He waited for the comfort he had always felt before. That gentle warmth, that sense of presence. He got nothing. Only the drip of water from the roof onto the stone. Only the distant, rising and falling siren of an ambulance. It sounded almost like laughter from far away. Elias went home and sat in his dark apartment until morning. The tragedy didn't end with the fire. Elias wished it had, because at least then he could have told himself it was one terrible event. But life didn't respect clean endings. Within a month, his wife left him. It wasn't sudden, not really. She had watched him change after the fire, watched his eyes lose focus, watched him sit at the kitchen table for hours without speaking. She tried to reach him. She made dinners he didn't eat. She touched his arm and asked him to come to bed. She cried and asked him to talk to her like he used to. Elias wanted to. He truly did. But there was a hollow space in him now that made everything echo. One evening, she stood in the doorway with her coat on and her keys in hand. Her face was pale. She looked like she hadn't slept either. "I can't live with you like this," she said. Not angry, not cruel, just exhausted. "You're here, but you're not here." Elias opened his mouth, but the words didn't come. He had the thought, "I'm sorry," but it was stuck behind a wall. She waited for him to stop her. She waited for him to say something that would make her stay. He didn't. The door closed, and the sound wasn't dramatic. It was just a soft click. But it landed in the apartment like a final decision. A week later, he got the diagnosis. Degenerative neurological condition. The doctor explained it with careful language and a calm voice. Elias heard phrases like progressive, motor decline, and cognitive changes. He heard about timelines and symptom management. He heard the doctor say, "We'll do what we can," and understood the unspoken part, "But there's no fixing this." Elias walked out of the hospital with pamphlets in his hand, pages full of smiling stock photo people who were meant to look hopeful. He took the elevator down, stepped outside, and found himself standing still on the sidewalk as crowds moved around him. Everyone looked busy. Everyone looked normal. The sun still shone. A bus still groaned past. Somewhere, someone laughed. The world didn't pause for him. It didn't even glance his way. That night, in his empty apartment, Elias stared up at the ceiling and finally said the word out loud. Why? It wasn't whispered. It wasn't polite. It came out of him like a broken thing being thrown. He said it again, louder as if volume could force the universe to answer. Why? He waited. The silence that followed wasn't peaceful. It felt heavy and wet, like something thick settling over him. It felt final, like the end of a conversation that never really started. And Elias realized something that scared him more than cruelty ever had. The universe wasn't cruel. It was indifferent. To Elias, indifference was the ultimate sin. Cruelty at least meant someone cared enough to harm you. Indifference meant you weren't even worth the effort. After that realization, the days blurred. Elias stopped eating. At first, it was just forgetting meals. Then, it became a choice. Food tasted like nothing. The act of chewing felt pointless. His stomach cramped and complained, but he ignored it the way he had learned to ignore other discomforts. He stopped sleeping, too. He would lie in bed, staring into the dark, eyes burning, listening to the building settle, to distant cars, to pipes. Every sound felt far away. He stopped going to work. He stopped returning calls. Coworkers came by at first, knocking on his door, leaving voicemails that got more worried over time. Eventually, even that faded. People have their own lives. People move on. The city swallowed his absence without any trouble. In the quiet, Elias began to think in circles. If God wasn't answering, maybe he was looking in the wrong place. If prayer did nothing, maybe faith was just another story people told themselves so they could sleep at night. Those thoughts would have horrified the old Elias. He used to mock fringe beliefs gently, like someone indulging a harmless superstition. He had rolled his eyes at online forums about ancient rituals and veil thinning and hidden knowledge. He believed in science and therapy and steady work. Now, with his world collapsing and his body betraying him, he started searching for anything that promised an answer. The internet led him into stranger corners than he expected. Old scanned pages from books with cracked spines. Forums where people spoke in coded language. Videos filmed in candlelight where voices whispered about peeling back the veil. There were rituals described in plain words that still made his skin crawl. Self-mutilation as a doorway. Sensory deprivation as a key. Fasting until the body became thin enough for something else to slip through. Elias read it all. He didn't laugh. He didn't argue. He just absorbed. He wanted to find the God who had abandoned him. Not to beg, to confront. There were nights when he sat in his bathroom with the light off, the tub full of cold water, and he held his breath until his lungs screamed, waiting to see if something would come to him in that edge between panic and blackout. He taped towels under the door to block light and sound and sat in the dark for hours until his own thoughts began to feel like they belonged to someone else. He carved small symbols into his skin, not deep at first, just enough to bleed. The pain anchored him for a few seconds at a time. He told himself it was part of a process, a sacrifice, a way to show he was serious, a way to make the universe look at him. Sometimes, in the middle of these experiments, he thought he sensed something. A pressure in the room, a shift in the air, a feeling like being watched. He would freeze and listen, heart pounding, and for a moment hope would flare. Maybe God had finally turned his face toward him. But it never felt holy. It felt empty. It felt like standing too close to a deep hole and realizing nothing was at the bottom. Not even darkness. Just absence. Elias's body changed as his mind decayed. It didn't happen all at once. No dramatic moment with lightning and screaming. It was slow, like rot. His skin lost its warmth first. It took on a gray tone, almost translucent, as if the blood under it had forgotten how to glow. He stopped looking like someone who went outside. He looked like someone who belonged in basements and hospital corridors. His cheeks sank in. His collarbones stood out. When he lifted his hands, he noticed the veins and tendons more clearly, as if his body was becoming a sketch of itself. Then, his fingers began to change. At first, he thought it was just weight loss, the way knuckles look sharper when you're thin. But then, the joints seemed wrong. The fingers looked longer, the tips narrower. His nails thickened, darkened, and sharpened. They became hard and glossy, like black glass. Obsidian needles at the ends of hands that didn't quite feel like his anymore. His eyes changed too. He had always had warm brown eyes, the kind people trusted. Over time, they seemed to sink back into his skull, as if his face was trying to hide them. The whites dulled, the skin around them darkened. And behind the dullness, something lit up. Amber. Not a bright golden glow like a candle. A deep ember color, the shade of coals when you stir them and the heat shows through. When Elias looked at himself in the mirror, it felt like he was seeing a fire that never went out. A fire that wasn't comfort. A fire that remembered the tenement fire and carried it forward like a disease. The mirror became harder to face. Sometimes, he would stand in front of it and stare, trying to find the man he used to be. A counselor, a husband, a believer. But that man was fading. In his place was something tight and strange, a person-shaped outline filled with emptiness. His mouth looked too thin. His skin clung to bone like wet parchment. His posture hunched slightly, not from age, but from the weight of something inside that wanted to fold inward. He stopped thinking of himself as Elias. Not at first, not cleanly. But the name began to feel like a label for someone else, someone who had died behind police tape while listening to people burn. He started writing in a notebook because his thoughts were slipping. Some days his hands shook. Some days he forgot what he was doing mid-motion. The disease was advancing. He wrote down words and phrases like anchors. No God, no meaning, hollow, void. At some point, late at night, he wrote a name he didn't remember choosing. Hano. He stared at it for a long time. The letters looked simple, almost harmless, but they made his stomach tighten. He didn't know where the word came from. It felt like it had risen out of him, like a bubble coming up from deep water. It felt like a sound you would make when you were trying to speak with a mouth full of ash. He whispered it once in the dark. Hano. The room seemed to respond, not with a voice, but with a sensation, like the air had thickened, like something had leaned closer. Elias, Hano, smiled for the first time in weeks, and it wasn't a human smile. After that, he became something else. It would be easy to say he became evil, but that's not exactly right. Evil suggests intention, a plan, a desire to harm. What happened to Elias was more like a collapse. When faith disappeared, something rushed into the space it left behind. Not a demon with horns, not a storybook monster. Something colder. The manifestation of the void. The thing that fills the gap when belief dies. Hano didn't hunt the strong. Strength didn't interest him. Strong people fought back, or they prayed, or they believed in their own survival in a way that made them hard to grab. Hano didn't hunt the wicked either, at least not in the way people might assume. Wickedness still had passion in it. Wickedness still believed in itself. Hano hunted the hollow. He was drawn to the quiet vibration of a heart that had given up. The kind of person who looked in the mirror and felt nothing but disgust or tiredness. The kind of person who stopped making plans, stopped answering messages, stopped believing tomorrow was worth the trouble. The kind of person who didn't necessarily want to die, but didn't want to live either. Those people had a certain stillness to them, like a light bulb right before it goes out. Hano could feel it in crowds. He could feel it through walls, And he didn't arrive the same way for everyone. If you believed in yourself, truly believed, Hano was invisible. He could stand right behind you and you would never sense him. Your confidence acted like a closed door. If you believed in a higher power, Hano became a shadow at the edge of things, a shape in the corner of your eye, a cold spot that made you turn your head, only to find nothing there. Faith didn't block him completely, but it blurred him, kept him from stepping fully into your life. But if you looked into the mirror and saw nothing worth saving, Hano didn't have to sneak in. He was already there, behind you. His first victim, in a way, was always going to be the landlord. The man who had chained the exits. The man who had turned other people's lives into a business calculation. The man who, according to rumors, had gone on vacation a week after the fire and posted photos of himself smiling on a beach. Elias had tried to tell himself not to hate. He had tried to give the anger to God, the way he was taught. But now there was no God to hold it. Hano found the landlord easily. It didn't matter that the man had security cameras and a new lock system and a fancy apartment in a better neighborhood. People like him always thought safety was something you could buy. One night, the landlord went into a room in his apartment. Some said it was a home office. Some said it was a storage room, and the door shut behind him. The next day, police found him inside. The door had been locked from the inside. No windows open. No signs of forced entry. No evidence that anyone else had been there. And yet the body on the floor looked like it had been handled by something that didn't understand mercy, or maybe didn't understand the human body at all. Turned inside out. That's what the first officer on scene said, voice shaking, before he threw up in the hallway. The report used different language, cleaner language, but the truth leaked out anyway, as truths always do in cities where people talk. The landlord's face was frozen in terror, so complete it didn't look like fear anymore. It looked like the moment a person realizes the rules of reality have stopped applying. It looked like someone staring directly into the void and recognizing it as the only honest thing in the universe. The coroner quit the next day. No speech, no explanation, just a resignation letter and an empty desk. Neighbors reported hearing a sound late that night, before everything went quiet. Not a normal scream, not a shout, a choked, guttural cry that didn't seem to come from a throat alone. It sounded like a plea and a curse and a name all at once. Hano. After that, the name spread the way urban legends spread. People repeated it with a half laugh, trying to make it less real. They told each other stories at bars. They posted about it online. They used it as a scare word, like Bloody Mary, like a joke you could summon and then dismiss. But those who were truly hollow didn't laugh. They felt something tighten in their stomachs when they heard it. They felt a cold recognition, as if the name was not new at all, as if it had always been waiting for them. Hano moved through the city now, and most people never noticed. If you saw him, you might not even understand what you were seeing at first. A tall distortion in the air, a thin figure where the background looked slightly wrong, like heat waves on pavement. A spindly outline that didn't match the light of the street lamps. Sometimes people described him as a man with arms too long and fingers too sharp. Sometimes they said it was just a feeling, like a headache that arrived with a sudden certainty. He didn't break down doors. He didn't chase people through alleys for fun. He followed the ones who were already stopping. The ones who sat in dark apartments with phones face down and curtains closed. The ones who stared at pill bottles without deciding anything. The ones who went to work and smiled and then came home and lay on the floor because the bed felt like too much effort. The ones who stopped praying not because they were angry, but because even anger takes energy. He fed on surrender. It wasn't blood he wanted most. It wasn't flesh. It was the moment a person finally let go inside. that quiet internal release when hope falls out of your hands and you don't bother to pick it up. People said strange things about him because language gets slippery around experiences like that. Some said Hano drank tears, not in a poetic way, in a literal way, as if grief was a kind of water he needed. Others said the air felt dry after he visited, like a room after a long illness. Some claimed that after Hano passed through a place, the mirrors looked different, like they reflected less than they should. To see him, truly see him, was to understand something painful. You were already halfway gone. You had already stepped so close to the edge that the void could reach you. And once you understood that, it was hard to climb back. Because fear can make you run, but emptiness makes you stay still. That was the birth of Hano. Not a lightning strike, not a curse spoken by a witch, not a demon crawling up from a basement. A good man broke under the weight of unanswered suffering. He looked for God and found silence. He stared into indifference until indifference stared back. Now he walked through the city as a consequence, a reminder, a shape that formed whenever belief died, and he was just getting started. Story 3. The first time I stepped through the chrono veil, I expected wonder. I expected proof that the universe was bigger than we thought, and that human curiosity could reach into it without getting burned. I was wrong. It started in my basement lab as a shimmer in the air, the kind you might see above hot pavement in summer. Except this shimmer didn't come from heat. It came from something that felt alive. It was like a tear in the world, no wider than a doorway, hanging there in the space between my workbench and the concrete wall. It vibrated with a low sound that reminded me of wet breathing, like something underwater pulling air through gills. A sound that made no sense in a room full of machines and dry dust. A sound that made the hairs on my arms lift as if my body knew it shouldn't be hearing it. I had worked for 7 years to reach that moment. 7 years of sleeping in short pieces, of drinking coffee until my hands shook, of writing equations over and over until the paper looked bruised. I wasn't some reckless hobbyist messing with a toy. I had a system. I believed in it. The math was elegant. The idea was simple, at least in the way the most dangerous ideas often are. Fold space-time like paper. Anchor the traveler to their own quantum signature so the timeline wouldn't reject them. Keep the jump clean. Keep it controlled. Make it scientific. I told myself that if the universe had rules, and if I could learn them, then I could bend them without breaking anything important. I chose a Tuesday in 1990 for my first test. I aimed for 1873. I wanted to see a specific moment, one I had obsessed over for years, the moment Nikola Tesla first imagined alternating current in a way that changed the world. Not because I wanted to steal credit, or change history, or meet him like some fan. I wanted to witness genius before it became legend. I wanted to stand in the same air, feel the temperature of that day, see how an idea forms inside a human mind when it's still raw. I stepped forward, expecting a rush of cold, maybe a flash of light, maybe the smell of old wood and coal smoke. Instead, I arrived somewhere that had never been 1873 at all. The first thing I saw was the sky. It wasn't blue or gray or anything that belonged above a normal planet. It was the color of infected flesh, the pinkish red of a wound that refuses to heal. Worse than the color was the way it moved. It pulsed slowly, like it had a heartbeat. Like the atmosphere itself was alive and working hard to stay alive. There were no stars, no moon, no clouds, just huge eyes hanging overhead in the distance, like they were part of the sky, and also separate from it. Lidless eyes, too big for scale to make sense. Each one looked the size of a continent. They blinked together all at once, as if connected to the same brain. When they closed, the world went completely dark. Not night dark, not cloud-cover dark. It was sudden, total absence, like reality had been switched off for exactly 3 seconds. When the eyes opened again, the ground had changed. I stood there, trying to place where I was supposed to be. My target had been Colorado Springs. I had imagined a Victorian street, cobblestones, brick buildings, people in coats and hats, horses pulling wagons. The idea had been so clear in my mind that my stomach still expected it. But there was no Victorian street. There was a street-like shape, maybe, but it was wrong in every detail. Cobblestones stretched out in every direction, straight lines that disappeared into infinity. Only the stones weren't stones. They were teeth. Human teeth. Animal teeth. Teeth that were too long, too thick, too curved. Teeth that looked like they had never been meant for any mouth that walked under a sun. They were set into the ground as if someone had paved a road with them, each one fixed into place at the root like a nail. As I shifted my weight, they chattered softly. A dry, clacking sound at first, then a deeper grinding like molars working. It wasn't random. It felt like reaction, like attention, like the ground knew I was there and was testing the idea of me. The buildings that lined the street leaned at angles that hurt to look at. I don't mean they were tilted. I mean they were arranged in a way that didn't match the rules my eyes and brain used to interpret space. My head started to ache as soon as I tried to focus on their corners. Their windows were filled with faces. My face. Not just one version, either. Dozens. Hundreds. Faces that were mine but older, mine but younger, mine but wrong in subtle ways, like a sketch done from memory by someone who didn't like me. Some had scars I don't have. Some had missing teeth. Some were swollen as if they'd been drowning. Some looked like they had never slept. Every face was screaming, but there was no sound. Their mouths were wide open, throats stretched, eyes bulging, yet the air stayed quiet, as if it refused to carry the noise. I stood frozen because my mind was trying to protect itself. It kept offering explanations the way a person offers excuses when they know something is going to end badly. Miscalculation, I told myself. A bad coordinate, a temporal echo, a strange side effect, something I could correct. My wrist device, the anchor, the return system, the emergency sequence, was supposed to be my safety net. I raised my arm, hands shaking, and activated the return sequence. The device sparked. Then it laughed. Not a recording, not a speaker glitch. A laugh that came from inside the metal like the metal had a throat. Soft, wet, almost amused. In that moment, a thought slid into my mind with awful clarity, like a knife finding a gap in armor. Time was not a river. Time was a stomach, and I had just been swallowed. My body finally remembered how fear works. I ran. The teeth beneath my boots bit into the rubber and leather. I felt pressure through the soles, little sharp bites, as if the road was tasting me. Not in a metaphorical way, in a real way. It didn't hurt at first, but I could feel the pull, the contact, the decision, like the ground was learning my shape and storing it. I saw people ahead and felt a brief wave of relief until I realized what I was looking at. They were me, versions of me from other jumps, other attempts, other failures. Some wore the same lab coat I had on. Some had different clothes, like they had landed in other years and tried to blend in. Some were barefoot and bloody. Some walked like their legs were borrowed. One of them was flayed open and still moving, the skin peeled away like a coat, and underneath the organs weren't arranged the way they should be. They were laid out like a machine, neat and patterned, pulsing in rhythm like gears. One of the versions of me had no face at all, just smooth skin where features should be, like someone had erased it. It turned its head toward me anyway, as if it could see, and then it whispered my childhood nickname in my mother's voice. That almost stopped me. The sound of my mother, the memory of being safe, of being small, hit my chest so hard I stumbled. But I kept moving, because stopping meant listening, and listening meant understanding, and something in me knew that understanding was the real danger here. The further I ran, the more the place revealed itself. It wasn't a different time period. It wasn't a parallel world. It wasn't a hidden dimension that existed beside ours. It was time itself, opened up. I had believed in parallel universes because they were comforting in a way. If there were endless timelines, then no single one had to carry all the weight. If you made a mistake, it only ruined one branch. If you died, another version of you might live. It made the universe feel forgiving. This place did not feel forgiving. Here, there weren't endless separate universes. There was only one timeline, folded over itself billions of times, crammed together like layers of meat packed into a grinder. Every moment that ever happened, and every moment that ever would happen, pressed against every other moment. Not stacked neatly, but smashed together until cause and effect weren't a sequence anymore. They were a mess, a pressure, a process. Cause and effect weren't laws. They were digestive enzymes. I saw things that should not be possible because possible depends on order, and order didn't live here anymore. I saw the heat death of the universe happening inside the birth of a single bacterium in 14th century Florence. I saw the end of everything flickering behind the beginning of everything like two images printed on the same page. I watched a medieval street candle melt, and inside the dripping wax I saw galaxies collapse. I looked at my own hands, and for a second the skin showed me wrinkles from an age I hadn't reached yet, then smoothed back out like nothing happened. And I saw my own death, not once, not as a clear vision. I saw it repeated, over and over, like a lesson being taught by someone who enjoyed the teaching. Every version was different. Every version was worse. In one, I was devoured by my future grandchildren, except they weren't human anymore. They had mandibles like insects, and their eyes were too large and too careful. They ate me like they were doing something normal and necessary. In another, I dissolved into laughter coming from collapsing stars, as if the universe itself could laugh and the sound could turn a person into liquid. In another, language killed me. A sentence spoken backward through a human throat, the words twisting reality until my body turned inside out as easily as turning a shirt. I started to realize something else, too. These weren't just visions meant to scare me. They were real in the way everything here was real. They were happening somewhere in the fold, in layers I couldn't see but could feel. The timeline wasn't showing me possibilities, it was showing me meals. The landscape changed as I moved, but not in a way that suggested I was traveling across distance. It was more like I was traveling across pressure points, across folds of the same terrible thing. One step would bring me past a memory that wasn't mine. Another step would bring me into a year that didn't exist. A year that felt like a typo in the universe. The blinking eyes overhead kept time in their own way. Every time they closed, the air changed. The smell shifted from metal to rot to clean hospital bleach to the sweet scent of a childhood summer that didn't belong here. Every time they opened, I could tell the ground had rearranged itself again. Teeth shifting. Streets bending, buildings leaning differently, faces in windows changing which version of me they displayed. At some point I realized I wasn't just being watched, I was being arranged. like the place was moving pieces on a board, guiding me toward something. That's when I found the center. I can't even call it a place, because place suggests you can stand there and point to it. The center was more like a moment, a convergence, the point where all times squeezed together the hardest. If the rest of the fold was the stomach, the center was the throat and the gut at once. The place where swallowing becomes digestion. It looked like a cathedral, but a cathedral built by a mind that didn't understand worship, only consumption. The walls were made of clocks, not just a few, every kind of clock you can imagine, and thousands you can't. Wristwatches, grandfather clocks, cuckoo clocks, sundials, broken digital displays, all of them smashed, all of them glued together with something dark and sticky. There were hourglasses everywhere, but the glass was shattered, and the sand spilled out and still fell upward in thin streams. Calendars were woven into the structure too, pages burned and half melted, dates smeared until they weren't dates anymore. At the heart of that impossible cathedral floated an entity. It wore my face, not as a disguise, not as a costume. It was my face the way a reflection is your face, except it stretched across angles I didn't have names for. The shape of it didn't fit into 3 dimensions cleanly. When I tried to focus, my eyes slid off it like it was coated in oil. It had too many eyes. Some were human. Some were like the eyes in the sky, huge and lidless. Some were small, insect-like, clustered around its cheeks. It had too many smiles. Smiles within smiles, mouths stacked the way folds of cloth stack. And it was smiling with teeth that didn't belong to it, teeth that looked stolen. The worst part was that I recognized some of them. Not individually, not like I could name whose they were, but I felt the familiarity of future meetings. The sense that those teeth belonged to people I hadn't met yet, but would. People who would matter to me. People I might love. People I might lose. It spoke without moving its lips. The sound didn't travel through the air so much as it appeared inside my head, wearing different voices like masks. You came looking for the past, it said in every voice I had ever loved and every voice I had ever feared. But the past is still being eaten. The future is the teeth, and the present is the scream caught between them. My legs gave out. I didn't even realize I was falling until my knees hit the tooth road and pain shot up into my bones. I begged it to send me home. I didn't try to bargain. I didn't threaten. I didn't pretend I had power. I just begged the way people beg when they finally understand they never had control. The thing laughed, and it laughed with my laugh. The laugh I make when I'm nervous at conferences, when I'm trying to sound casual while my stomach tightens. Hearing it from something like that made me feel violated in a way I didn't know was possible. There is no home, it said. There is only the fold. You are already here in every layer. You have always been here. You will always be failing to leave. I couldn't accept that. I refused. I was a scientist. I had built the chrono veil. I had an emergency override for exactly this kind of scenario. A last resort. A command that should have unraveled the veil and snapped me back to my basement lab in 1990 like a rubber band released from tension. My hands shook so badly I almost couldn't activate it. I pressed the sequence anyway. For a split second, hope flared. The device warmed against my wrist. Lights blinked. The metal casing shifted. Then it opened. It didn't open like a machine. It opened like a flower made of bone, segments peeling back with a soft cracking sound, like ribs spreading apart. Inside it was darkness, but not empty darkness. It was full. Something poured out. They were me. Every version of me that had ever attempted this journey, spilling into the cathedral space like a flood that had been waiting behind a dam. Thousands. maybe millions. Different ages, different clothes, different injuries. Some screamed. Some were already quiet, their eyes replaced by tiny, perfect clocks that ticked backward. Some had hands with too many joints, fingers bending in extra places like they were designed for equations instead of touch. They reached for me. And they whispered. Not comforting whispers, not warnings. They whispered math. They whispered solutions. Equations that felt complete, terrifyingly complete, like the final proof of something you never wanted proven. They spoke the exact second when sanity ends, not as an idea, but as a coordinate you could point to. I ran again because it was the only thing my body could do. But running didn't work here the way it works in the real world. Every direction was a different failure. Every path led to another version of me. Every corner turned back into the same pressure. The blinking eyes overhead closed again, and in those 3 seconds of darkness, I felt hands on me. Not hands with skin and warmth, but hands like cold instruments, measuring, adjusting, deciding where to place me next. When the eyes opened, I was somewhere else, and also nowhere else. The cathedral was behind me, or above me, or inside me. I couldn't tell. I couldn't tell if I was moving through time, or if time was moving through me. At some point, I stopped trying to escape and started trying to record, because recording felt like a thin thread connecting me to the version of myself who used to believe in ordinary reality. I found something like a page, though calling it paper is generous. It feels like skin, too warm, too familiar, like it belongs to me, but from later. I'm writing this now on a sheet made from my own future skin. I know how that sounds, but everything here sounds like that. The ink is blood from a wound that hasn't happened yet. I can feel it on my side, a dull ache, as if my body is remembering an injury before it exists. Every few minutes, I feel the teeth beneath me shift, restless, curious, tasting the air the way animals taste before they bite. If you are reading this, do not build the chrono veil. Do not chase the past. I used to think the greatest horrors were things we couldn't understand because they were too far away, or too strange, or too hidden. Now I know the real nightmare is different. Some horrors are beyond comprehension, not because they are hidden, but because the moment you understand them, the act of understanding becomes the horror. Your mind becomes the place where the teeth sink in. And it is hungry. It has always been hungry. It is hungry right now, in the moment between your last heartbeat and the next. In the tiny gap you never notice. In the blink you don't remember. In the quiet space where you assume time is behaving, because it usually does. Close the book. Turn off the light. Pretend time still flows in one direction. It's kinder that way. I wish I still could. Story 4. I stood in the doorway of my apartment with my keys still in my hand, just staring. My mouth was actually hanging open, like my brain couldn't decide what it was looking at. It didn't look like someone had simply broken in. It looked like something violent had happened in every room. Like a tornado, it picked up inside my living room, spun in circles for a few minutes, and then decided to leave me the cleanup as a final insult. My TV was on the floor, not just knocked over, but smashed. The screen was spiderwebbed with cracks, and a few chunks of glass had fallen out onto the carpet. Books were everywhere, some opened, some bent backward like someone had snapped their spines on purpose. Old DVDs in cases were scattered under the coffee table and halfway into the hallway. Little things I'd collected over the years. Souvenirs, a cheap ceramic mug my sister gave me, a small framed photo I kept meaning to replace, had been tossed around like trash. Boxes of pantry food were ripped open and thrown down. Cans had rolled under furniture. A bag of chips had exploded across the entryway, crumbs ground into the tile. The whole place looked like it had been searched by someone who hated me personally. I took one step inside. The sole of my shoe crunched on broken glass. I stopped, immediately regretting it, and shifted my weight carefully so I wouldn't cut through my shoes. Then I took another step, slow and careful, like I was walking through a field of sharp rocks. My first thought was stupid and automatic. I must have left a window open, or the maintenance people came in, or anything besides what this obviously was. Then my stomach dropped, because there was no way to pretend. Someone had been here. Someone had gone through my home while I wasn't. I turned and closed the door behind me. It was another instinct, like I could undo something by sealing the apartment shut. The latch clicked, but the sound was off. Not the clean, normal click I heard every day. This sounded loose, like the latch didn't catch right away, like metal scraping metal, like the door didn't fully belong to me anymore. I stood there for a second with my hand on the knob, listening. Nothing. No footsteps. No breathing. No movement from the living room. Just the low hum of the refrigerator somewhere in the back, and the distant buzz of the building's air system. The kind of background noise you never notice until you're terrified and listening for anything that doesn't fit. I started moving again, slow, lifting my feet higher than normal to clear obstacles. I didn't want to trip. I didn't want to make noise. I didn't want to announce myself to someone who might still be inside. The hallway was worse than I expected. Someone had pulled open drawers, dumped contents, and left them like that, as if my belongings were too disgusting to put back. My own stuff, my clothes, my mail, my random junk, was now a problem I had to step around just to move through my own home. I headed straight for my bedroom, not because it made sense, but because I had one thought pounding in my head: money. I kept a stash, cash I'd saved over time, because I didn't trust banks as much as I probably should. It wasn't a fortune, but it was enough that losing it would hurt. It was enough that I'd feel it every day for months. Then, as I got closer to the bedroom, a sound cut through the silence so cleanly it made my spine go stiff. Beep! It wasn't loud, but it carried. It had that artificial sharpness electronic noises have, like it was designed to slice right through a room and force your attention. My brain didn't place it for half a second. I just froze, holding my breath. Beep! Microwave. The microwave makes that sound when it's done, when it wants you to come get your food before it cools down. I stood there in my hallway, staring at nothing, and the most ridiculous thought slid into my mind like it belonged there. What, did the burglar heat up leftovers? It was absurd. It was the kind of idea you'd laugh at if you were telling the story later, safe and calm, talking about how your mind does weird things under stress. But I wasn't safe and calm. The apartment was wrecked, my things were everywhere, and the microwave was beeping like someone had used it recently. A cold chill rolled over me. Not a metaphor. My skin actually prickled, because another thought came right behind the first one, stronger and uglier. If the microwave was used, then someone might still be here. I started moving faster, trying to be quiet but not caring as much about stepping on things. I reached my bedroom door and pushed it open with my shoulder. The bedroom looked like the rest of the place. Drawers yanked out, clothes tossed. My dresser had been attacked. A couple drawers were missing completely. Others hung open at crooked angles, barely clinging to their tracks. I crossed the room quickly and pulled open my sock drawer. My hands were shaking so much I had trouble even gripping the handle. I didn't want to look, because looking made it real, but I needed to know. I shoved aside socks and felt for the envelope I kept tucked underneath. Nothing. I dug deeper, stupidly hoping it had slid to the back. I pushed my fingers into the corners, under the wood, like maybe it had fallen into some secret space. Still nothing. My chest went hot. I punched the air once, like a useless reflex, and had to bite down on a curse that wanted to come out loud. I didn't want to shout. I didn't want to make noise in case someone was still in the apartment. From the kitchen, faint but clear, the microwave beeped again. Beep! The sound felt wrong in my home, like a voice calling from a room I didn't want to enter. I forced myself to think. What else? What else did I have? Another thought hit me, and I turned toward my closet. My feet slid a little on something on the floor. Maybe a shirt, maybe a towel, because everything was everywhere. I yanked the closet door open and immediately saw the hamper, an old wicker one I'd had forever. It was full of dirty laundry. It looked almost untouched compared to everything else, probably because it was disgusting enough that even a burglar didn't want to dig through it. That was why I'd chosen it. I dropped to one knee and shoved my hand down into the hamper, past jeans and socks and a couple shirts. The smell of old sweat hit my nose, but I didn't care. I felt around at the bottom, searching for the hard shape I knew was there. My fingers touched cold steel. Relief hit me so hard my eyes stung. I pulled the object up, and there it was, the small lockbox. It wasn't fancy, just a plain metal box with a dial. Inside were my important documents, a few valuables, and the handgun I kept for emergencies I always told myself would never happen. My hands were still shaking, but muscle memory took over as I set it on the carpet and turned the dial. I had entered that combination so many times over the years just to make sure I remembered it, just to reassure myself that if I ever needed it, I wouldn't fumble. The lock popped. I opened it and looked down at the contents, and a wave of relief washed over me again. Everything was there. Papers, a little pouch of jewelry I barely wore, and the gun. I grabbed the handgun. The weight of it was heavy and real, in a way nothing else in my apartment felt right then. I racked it, chambering around with a click that sounded too loud in the quiet room. The sound made my heart jump, because it reminded me that noise travels. But it also reminded me that I wasn't completely helpless. I closed the lockbox, spun the dial, and shoved it back down into the hamper under the laundry, covering it quickly like I was hiding it from an intruder who might be watching me. Right now. Then I stood up slowly and listened again. No footsteps, no movement, just the same distant hum of appliances and the occasional quiet sound of the building settling. I began going room to room, the way you do in movies when you think you're being careful, even though the truth is there's no way to do it safely by yourself. I checked the bathroom first. The shower curtain hung still. The cabinets under the sink were open, things tossed out onto the tile. I looked behind the curtain anyway, even though I knew it was empty. My brain wanted to see it with my own eyes. Then I checked the living room. The couch cushions were thrown onto the floor. A lamp was tipped over. I kept the gun low, but ready, my finger off the trigger like I had been taught. I looked behind the couch. I checked the space near the window. I checked the corner where I sometimes left my gym bag. Nothing. I moved to the small guest room I used as an office. My desk drawers were pulled open. Papers were scattered. My chair was pushed awkwardly like someone had stood on it to reach something. I checked the closet. Empty. Every room was a disaster, but every room was empty. I didn't relax. Not really. The microwave kept beeping every so often, and the sound tugged at me like a string tied around my ribs. Beep! I checked the hall closet next, the one where I kept cleaning supplies and an extra blanket. The door was already open. A broom lay across the hallway like a fallen guard. I nudged it aside with my foot and looked inside, half expecting eyes to blink back at me from the darkness. Nothing there either. I stood in the hallway again, surrounded by the mess, trying to slow my breathing. My heart was beating hard enough that it made my ears throb. I told myself to focus. Call the police. Get out. Don't play hero in your own apartment. But before I could even pull out my phone, another thought slid in. Where was Buster? The question hit me like a punch, because it had been sitting in the back of my mind the whole time, waiting for my adrenaline to make space for it. Buster was my dog, a little dachshund with a long body and short legs and a personality that took up an entire room. He wasn't a quiet dog. He made noise when someone walked by our door in the hallway. He barked when the mail got shoved through the slot. He barked when the neighbors sneezed too loud. If someone had broken into my apartment, Buster would have gone crazy. Unless he wasn't here. I lowered the gun a bit and started looking around, calling softly, not wanting to shout. Buster? My voice sounded thin and weak in my own ears. No patter of paws, no nails clicking on tile, no excited snort, no little whine he made when he wanted attention. I checked the bedroom again, looking under the bed. Nothing. I checked behind the couch. Nothing. I checked the bathroom, because he sometimes followed me in there like a little shadow. Nothing. My throat felt tight. Beep! The microwave again, patient and stupid and ordinary like it belonged in a normal day. I tried to force logic into my panic. Maybe he ran out when the intruder came in. Maybe the door didn't latch right and he slipped into the hallway. He could have gotten scared and bolted. It made sense. It was the kind of thing that happens sometimes. Dogs get scared, they run. But the idea of him alone somewhere in the building, confused and frightened, made my stomach twist. I told myself I'd look for him after I called the police. I told myself he was probably fine. I told myself I'd find him quickly, because people in the building knew him. He was friendly. Someone would pick him up. Someone would call me. I tried to cling to that. My home had been broken into and trashed, and now my dog was missing. I took a slow breath and reached into my pocket for my phone, thinking about which neighbor might have security cameras, thinking about what I'd tell the police, thinking about the exact moment I'd walked in and realized everything was wrong. Beep! That sound again, cutting through everything. I huffed, irritation and fear mixing into something that felt like anger. The microwave beep wasn't just a noise anymore. It was a reminder that there was a room in my apartment I hadn't checked yet. It was a reminder that something had happened in my kitchen recently enough that the microwave still thought it needed to tell someone it was finished. I started walking toward the kitchen, moving carefully through the mess. I had to step over a case of canned soup that had been knocked over. I almost slipped on something slick, maybe oil, maybe water. I caught myself on the wall with my free hand, my fingers smearing through some grime I didn't want to think about. The kitchen was dark except for one thing, the microwave display. Its neon green numbers glowed like a tiny sign in the night. It wasn't bright enough to light the room, but it was enough to make the microwave look like a face watching me. I flipped the light switch. The overhead light came on, harsh and immediate, and I took a step forward. Then, stopped. The smell hit me so fast, I gagged. It wasn't just something burned, it was thick and sickening, like burnt meat mixed with hair. A greasy, awful smell that stuck to the inside of my nose. My eyes watered instantly. My stomach lurched like it wanted to throw up right there on the tile. I pinched the bridge of my nose with my free hand, trying to breathe through my mouth instead. My throat still felt raw. The smell had a weight to it, like it clung to the air. I straightened, blinking through tears, and that's when I saw it. The microwave door. Someone had taped a sheet of plain white copy paper over the small window in the door, covering it completely. The tape was crooked, like it had been slapped on in a hurry. The paper looked so out of place, so clean and office-like, sitting there in my wrecked kitchen. Words were written across it in thick, angry block letters. The letters were uneven, like the person had pressed too hard with the marker. Stupid dog wouldn't shut up. For a moment, my brain refused to process it. It felt like reading something in a dream, where the words don't settle into meaning. Then they did. The gun in my hand suddenly felt heavier, like my arm didn't want to hold it. My heart started racing so fast it made me lightheaded. A cold, crawling fear moved across my skin. No. I didn't want to look closer. I didn't want to understand. I didn't want to be in my own kitchen anymore. But my body had already gone still, frozen in place, because some part of me knew that moving closer would make it real in a way I couldn't undo. My voice came out as a small, broken sound. "Bee Buster?" I whimpered. The apartment didn't answer. No bark, no scratch at the door, no familiar little whine. The microwave answered instead. Beep. Story 5. Dahlia was 7 years and 4 months old, and that last part mattered to her a lot. In her group of friends, it made her the oldest. Not by much, but enough. Enough that she could say it out loud with confidence. Enough that it gave her a quiet little advantage when the other kids argued about rules or whose turn it was. If she needed everyone to listen, she could always pull that fact out like a badge. Dahlia, look. That was Mika, her best friend. Mika's arm was already up, finger stretched straight across the school courtyard. Dahlia followed the line of it and saw Jimmy Peterson on the other side, running hard with his head turned the wrong way, like he was trying to talk to someone behind him while still sprinting forward. Jimmy was headed straight for one of the benches. Dahlia turned just in time to see it happen. Jimmy's knee clipped the edge first, then his shin, then his whole body pitched forward. His arms flew up like he was about to catch himself, but he was already too far gone. He hit the ground with a loud slap and rolled awkwardly, and the sound of it made a bunch of kids laugh before they even processed what they were laughing at. Dahlia laughed too. She couldn't help it. That's what you get for running while looking the other way like that, Dahlia managed to say between giggles, her stomach hurting from it. Who cares? Mika said, laughing even harder, like the whole thing was the funniest thing she'd ever seen. Mika was always like that. She said whatever came into her head without stopping to clean it up first. Dahlia didn't mind. Most of the time, she agreed with her. Mika's family didn't make a big deal out of small things, and being around her felt like being around normal life. But even while Dahlia was laughing, her eyes kept sliding back to Mika's hand. Mika was still pointing. Dahlia felt something tighten in her chest, like a small, invisible string being pulled. There was an old reflex inside her, sharp and immediate, and it almost jumped out of her mouth on its own. Don't do that. She didn't say it. She swallowed it. She forced her face to stay relaxed and laughing, because she didn't want Mika to notice. She didn't want to be the weird one. She didn't want to sound like her mother. The truth was, Dahlia's mom was strict about certain things in a way Dahlia didn't fully understand. At home, most of the time, things were fine. Her mom could be sweet and funny and normal. She'd hum while she cooked. She'd let Dahlia pick the movie on Friday nights. She'd rub Dahlia's hair when she had a headache. But then there were these specific rules, a few small things that turned her into someone else. Pointing was one of them. When Dahlia was younger, she pointed at everything. She wasn't great at explaining what she meant, so pointing was easy. If she wanted juice, she pointed. If she wanted a toy, she pointed. If she saw a dog on the sidewalk, she pointed and squealed. It was just how she communicated when she didn't have the right words yet. Her mom hated it. "We don't do that," her mom would say, and her voice would go flat and sharp at the same time, like a blade turned sideways. At first, she tried to control herself, like she was reading off some parenting book and forcing calm into her tone. But as Dahlia got older, it got worse, not better. Now her mom didn't even wait. The second Dahlia's arms started to rise, her mom's hand would shoot out and grab her wrist. Not hard enough to bruise, but hard enough to stop her. Hard enough to make it clear that this wasn't a normal rule like wash your hands or don't run with scissors. We don't do that, her mom would say, separating the words, pushing each one into Dahlia like she was trying to push the message through her bones. And her mom's eyes would change when she said it. Not angry like normal angry. Something else. Something that made Dahlia's stomach twist and made her drop her hand instantly, even if she didn't understand why. Dahlia didn't hate her mom for it. She never even really thought of it that way. It was just a thing. An annoying thing. A weird thing. A rule that didn't match the rest of their life. Sometimes Dahlia tried to explain it to Mika, because Mika asked questions about everything. She's usually so nice and normal, Dahlia told her once, sitting together at lunch. It's like some things just flip a switch on her. Mika had wrinkled her nose. That's so weird. It's just pointing. Dahlia had shrugged and picked at her food, but she couldn't stop thinking about the other part. The part that made her feel something she didn't have a word for yet. Because her mom didn't just say, "Don't point." Her mom said something else too, sometimes in a rush, sometimes in a whisper, sometimes like it slipped out by accident. Don't ever let your grandfather see you do that. You hear me? Ever was the word that stuck. Not don't do it at school, or don't do it in public, but ever. Like it was dangerous in a way that didn't go away. Like pointing wasn't a rude habit, but a door you could open without meaning to. The first time her mom said it, Dahlia laughed a little because she thought it was a joke. Her mom didn't laugh back. Her mom's face tightened, and her eyes looked far away, like she was watching something that wasn't in the room. After that, Dahlia stopped laughing when her mom mentioned her grandfather. Dahlia's grandparents lived out of town, and they didn't see them all the time. That should have made Dahlia excited for visits like most kids were. But the word grandfather made her think of her mom's voice when she said it, and the way her fingers squeezed Dahlia's wrist. Dahlia didn't know exactly what had happened to her mom when she was a kid, but she could tell something had. Sometimes her mom would start to say something and then stop. Sometimes she'd get quiet during car rides, staring at the road like she was counting something. I think it was worse for her, Dahlia told Mika once, trying to sound like she didn't care. Being a kid with my grandpa as her dad. Mika had scoffed. Why are your folks like this? It's just so weird. Why do they care so much? Dahlia didn't have an answer. She just liked that Mika didn't act like these rules were normal. It made Dahlia feel like she wasn't crazy for thinking it was strange. School felt like a place where things made sense. Kids laughed. Teachers got annoyed. People pointed at things and nobody grabbed their wrists like it was an emergency. Still, after watching Mika point across the courtyard at Jimmy Peterson, Dahlia couldn't stop thinking about it. How long had it been since Dahlia had done that freely, without flinching? How long since she'd lifted her arm without feeling her mother's hand there, even when her mom wasn't around? When was the last time Dahlia had pointed at someone just because she wanted to? The thought made her do something she didn't notice at first. Her fingers slid around her own wrist, lightly, like she was checking to make sure it was still hers. That Saturday morning, Dahlia sat at the kitchen table with a bowl of cereal. The sun through the window made the milk look bright and clean. She laughed softly to herself, remembering Jimmy's face right before he hit the bench, the confused surprise of it. Her mom walked in fast, already talking before she even crossed the room. "How's the cereal, love?" her mom said in the cheerful voice she used when she had a list in her head. Remember, we have to be at Grandma and Grandpa's house by lunch. I want to buy a couple things at a local store there, and it takes us an hour to get there by car. Don't take too long on that cereal or we won't make it on time. There's lots to do. She didn't wait for an answer. She kissed the top of Dahlia's head as she passed and disappeared down the hall, her footsteps quick like she was racing the day. Dahlia ate and stared at the table. She told herself she was thinking about Jimmy and the bench and how funny it was. That was the nice thought, the safe thought. The real thought was Mika's finger, straight and fearless. In the car, the road hummed under the tires. Trees passed in a green blur. Dahlia watched her mom's hands on the steering wheel and tried to imagine her mom as a kid. Tried to imagine her mom doing the things Dahlia did, running at recess, laughing too loud, pointing at something exciting. It was hard. Dahlia couldn't picture it without the image feeling wrong, like her mom had always been an adult. They stopped at a store near her grandparents' town. The parking lot was busy, and the air smelled like warm asphalt. Dahlia's mom unbuckled and turned to her. "Let's go, hun," her mom said. "Grab something nice for yourself while I get what we need to bring over to Grandma and Grandpa's place, okay?" Inside, the store was bright and cold. The lights buzzed overhead. Dahlia wandered the aisles, looking at candy and snacks, picking up things and putting them back, trying to decide what felt like a treat, and not just regular food. She found a couple items she liked and carried them carefully back to her mom. Her mom was near the front, standing beside a cart, talking to a woman she seemed to know. They were chatting in that adult way where they smiled but didn't really listen, both of them talking in turns and nodding. Dahlia dropped her snacks into her mom's basket and stood quietly at her side. Across the store, near the other registers, a man stood with his back turned. He was on the phone. His voice was loud enough that Dahlia could hear pieces of it even without trying. He waved his free hand around while he talked like he was explaining something to the air. Dahlia stared at him. A strange feeling rose in her chest. Not exactly anger and not exactly curiosity, but something like a dare. A small rebellion. A thought that felt shiny and dangerous. "I want to do it." Her mom was distracted. The other woman was laughing at something. Nobody was watching Dahlia. Slowly, quietly, Dahlia raised her arm and pointed at the man. For one brief moment, it felt good. It felt like stepping out of a tight shoe, like stretching a limb that had been cramped for too long. A tiny wave of freedom ran through her, and she almost smiled. Then the man turned his head, not his body, just his head. His shoulders stayed facing away, his spine stayed straight, but his head rotated toward Dahlia with a smooth, wrong movement. His eyes were wide, too wide, and they landed directly on hers, as if they'd been waiting for this exact second. Dahlia's smile vanished. Her finger went stiff in the air, like her arm had locked. The store noise seemed to fall away. The lights felt harsher. The air around Dahlia turned cold so fast it made her skin prickle. She tried to lower her hand, but it wouldn't move. Or maybe she couldn't remember how to make it move. The man didn't blink. His face didn't change. No surprise, no irritation, no "can I help you?" expression, just blankness. And then, slowly, he began to tilt his head to the side, as if someone was gently turning a doll's head. As he tilted, the corners of his mouth started to droop. At first it looked like a frown forming. Then it kept going, pulling down farther than any normal face could stretch. Dahlia's heartbeat thudded so hard, it felt like it was shaking her ribs. She tried to breathe, tried to fill her lungs, but it felt like the air was thin, like the store had suddenly moved higher up into the sky. The man's head kept tilting. His mouth kept sagging. When his head was almost sideways, Dahlia realized she was sweating, not from heat, from fear. a cold sweat on her back and under her arms. Her eyes watered, but she didn't blink. She couldn't. She couldn't look away. "Dahlia?" Her mom's voice cracked through the moment like a slap. Dahlia's wrist was yanked downward as her mom grabbed it, hard. Dahlia flinched, and her arm dropped. The world rushed back in, the hum of lights, the beep of registers, the chatter of shoppers. Dahlia sucked in a breath like she'd been underwater. She snapped her eyes back to the man. He was turned away again, talking on his phone exactly like before, waving his hand, voice loud and normal. No sideways head, no stretching mouth, no wide, unblinking eyes, like nothing had happened. Dahlia's stomach rolled. Confusion hit first, then a sick, shaky relief, then fear again, because she couldn't tell which part was real. Had she imagined it? She looked at her mom. Her mom was staring at her, and for a split second, Dahlia saw something in her face that made her feel very small. Not anger, not even disappointment, recognition. Her mom's grip tightened around Dahlia's wrist. Without letting go, her mom dropped the shopping basket so fast it clattered on the floor. The woman she'd been talking to started to say something, but Dahlia's mom didn't answer. She didn't even look back. She pulled Dahlia through the store, moving so quickly, Dahlia had to stumble to keep up. "Mom, what? Not now," her mom said, voice low and sharp, like she was afraid the wrong sound would make something happen. They pushed through the doors into the parking lot. The air outside felt warmer, but Dahlia couldn't stop shivering. Her mom opened the car door, practically shoved Dahlia into the seat, and buckled her in with shaking hands. Then she ran around to the driver's side and got in, breathing hard like she'd been sprinting. Dahlia looked at her mom's face. Her mom's lips were pale. Her eyes were too bright. "Get in the car," her mom said, more to herself than to Dahlia, starting the engine with a trembling twist of the key. She backed out fast, tires crunching on gravel. Dahlia's wrist still ached where her mom had grabbed her. "We need your grandfather," her mom said, staring straight ahead at the road like she didn't dare glance at Dahlia again. Now. Story 6. One night, I woke up so suddenly it felt like someone had shaken me, even though nobody had touched me. There was no nightmare I could remember, no loud crash, no obvious reason for my eyes to be wide open. For a few seconds, I just lay there, listening, trying to figure out what had pulled me out of sleep. The room was dark, the kind of dark where you can still make out shapes, but nothing looks clear. Through the window, I could see the tops of trees moving back and forth in the wind, their shadows sliding over the walls in slow, messy patterns. The branches creaked the way they always do on stormy nights, a long wooden groan that rises and falls depending on the gusts. One branch in particular kept reaching toward the window, tapping and brushing the glass like it was trying to get my attention. Brenda was next to me, asleep on her side, her face relaxed and calm. She looked completely untouched by whatever had woken me up. Watching her for a moment made me feel a little embarrassed, like I'd overreacted to nothing. I reached for my phone and checked the time, 2:23 a.m. I set the phone back down and lay there again, staring at the window. The branch kept grazing the glass, light and irregular, the way a tree branch does when it's just close enough to make contact. It was annoying, but it wasn't scary. I remember thinking I should trim it in the morning. Then my eyelids started to feel heavy again. The wind became background noise. My thoughts slowed down. I don't know exactly when I fell asleep. It was like my brain simply gave up and slipped back into darkness. I woke up again to a louder sound. This time there was no confusion, no slow return to reality. The noise yanked me up hard, like a hook in my chest. The wind had gotten stronger, and that same branch wasn't brushing the window anymore. It was slamming into it. Not gently, not accidentally. It hit the glass with a rhythm that didn't sound like wind. It sounded angry. The pounding came in hard bursts, then stopped, then hit again. For one brief second, I actually wondered if I was still dreaming, if I'd woken up inside a nightmare. I turned my head toward Brenda. She was still sleeping. Peaceful, breathing slow. No flinch, no stir, like the noise didn't even exist. That made my skin crawl. If it was loud enough to wake me up twice, why wasn't it waking her? I stayed still for a moment, listening. The pounding continued. The sound filled the bedroom, bouncing off the walls and making the window feel like a weak spot, like something could give if it kept going. I slid my legs out of bed carefully, moving slow so I wouldn't shake the mattress. The sheets shifted with a soft whisper. My feet touched the wooden floor, and the cold shot up through my soles. The house was warm, but the floor always held on to the night chill, like it never fully warmed up. I opened the nightstand drawer as quietly as I could and reached inside for the pistol I kept tucked away. I hated that I owned it, hated that I felt like I needed it, but we lived far enough out that police response time wasn't something you could count on. Most nights I forgot it was there. That night, my hand found it without hesitation. The drawer made a soft scrape as it moved, and the sound was enough to trigger my phone screen. The dim glow lit up the inside of the nightstand for a second, and I saw the time again. 2:28 a.m. 5 minutes had passed. It didn't feel like 5 minutes. I held the pistol low at my side and walked to the bedroom door. The pounding at the window was still going, hard enough now that I could hear faint vibrations in the glass, like it was absorbing the blows. I wrapped my hand around the doorknob and turned it so slowly it barely clicked. The moment the door opened, the sound from outside rushed in even louder, like the room had been holding it back. It filled the space between the walls and made the whole house feel hollow. I took a slow breath through my nose, trying to calm my pulse, trying to think through the next steps like a normal person and not someone about to panic. I was just about to lean out and look down the hallway when I heard something from downstairs. It wasn't a voice. It wasn't a clear footstep either. It was a noise that suggested movement, something shifting and settling, like a person trying not to be heard. The kind of small sound you only notice because everything else is so quiet. I froze. My first instinct was to close the door and lock it, to get back in bed and pretend this was all just the wind. But then I thought about Brenda. I looked back over my shoulder. She had shifted slightly, like she was turning in her sleep, but she still didn't wake up. Her hair was spread across the pillow. Her face was half buried in the blanket. She looked vulnerable in a way that made my stomach tighten. I stepped out into the hallway and pulled the bedroom door mostly shut behind me, leaving it cracked open just enough that I could slip back in fast if I needed to. The hallway was completely dark. At night, the house always felt different, but that night it felt almost unreal. The trees outside threw moving shadows through the windows, and the shadows layered across the hallway walls and ceiling. It looked like I was walking through a tunnel made of branches. The moonlight should have helped, but it barely made it in, like the outside world was blocking it on purpose. I moved forward slowly, trying to place my feet where the floor wouldn't creak, but old boards creak anyway. Each step made a small complaint under my weight. I paused after every few steps and listened. The wind kept pushing the trees around outside. The branch kept pounding on the window somewhere behind me. Inside, everything else was too still. When I reached the end of the hallway, I stopped at the top of the stairs. There was a light switch on the wall there that controlled the room at the bottom. I stood with my hand near it, hesitating, because turning on a light can be a mistake. It tells someone where you are. But staying in darkness felt worse. I counted to 3 silently and flipped it. hoping the sudden light would scare away anyone who didn't belong in my house. Nothing happened. No light, no glow from below, just darkness, swallowing darkness. That was the moment the fear got real. A burned-out bulb would have been annoying. A power outage would have made sense. But the house didn't feel dead the way it does when the power's out. The air still had that faint hum of electricity. My phone had lit up a minute ago. There should have been something. I took another breath, tighter this time, and started down the stairs. I kept the pistol up now, angled toward the lower floor. Each step felt longer than it should have, and the darkness below felt thicker, like it had weight. I kept expecting a shape to rise out of it, a person waiting halfway down. When I reached the bottom, I stood still and scanned the room. I couldn't see much, but I could make out the outlines of furniture, the darker blocks against the dark. I moved forward carefully, keeping my shoulders tense, trying to control the way my breathing sounded in my ears. I headed toward the kitchen first. The kitchen had another light switch, and if there was anyone in the house, I wanted to see them clearly. I reached the wall, found the switch, and flipped it. The kitchen light came on. It was so bright compared to the darkness outside the doorway that it made me squint. The sudden normalness of it, the yellow light, the counters, the sink, the magnets on the fridge, almost made me feel stupid for being afraid. Almost. Because the kitchen wasn't empty in the way it should have been. On the counter, right out in the open, was a sandwich. Not just a sandwich, but a half-eaten sandwich, with a bite mark torn through the bread and the filling pressed messy at the edge. It looked fresh. It hadn't dried out. Whoever had eaten it hadn't cleaned up, hadn't tried to hide it. It was sitting there like someone had been interrupted mid-bite. My throat went tight. I didn't move for a second. I just stared at it, my brain trying to put it in the right place. Brenda and I hadn't made food that night. We'd gone to bed hours ago. Even if one of us had come down for a snack, why leave it like that? Why take one bite and abandon it? I took a slow step forward, then another, keeping my eyes on the kitchen and the doorway behind me at the same time. The wind outside sounded farther away now, like the house itself had become the loudest thing in the world. I listened for another sound from the lower floor, but there was nothing. Then, I heard Brenda scream. It wasn't a startled yelp or a half-asleep groan. It was a full, terrified scream that ripped through the house like a siren. The sound hit me so hard my body moved before my mind caught up. I ran. I don't even remember turning off the kitchen light. I don't remember whether I looked back at the sandwich. I just bolted for the stairs, shouting her name as I went. My legs felt weak, like they didn't trust the floor beneath them. The steps seemed to stretch upward, too many of them, each one heavy and slow. The pistol felt useless in my hand because I couldn't aim it while running. All I could do was climb. As I reached the top, the hallway looked wrong. The dim light from the kitchen spilled upward and spread out, but it didn't make the hallway feel safer. It made the shadows sharper. The tree branches outside were still moving, still painting the walls with shifting shapes, and now the hallway seemed longer than it had any right to be, like it had added distance while I was downstairs, like it didn't want me to get back to the bedroom quickly. "Brenda," I yelled again, louder, my voice cracking. I sprinted down the hall, and when I reached the bedroom door, I threw it open so hard it hit the wall. She was sitting up in bed, shaking. Her face was wet with tears, and her eyes were wide in a way I'd never seen before, like she couldn't decide what to focus on. She looked like she'd been pulled straight out of a nightmare and dropped into the room without warning. I rushed to her side, asking what happened, asking if she was hurt, if someone was in the room, if she saw anything. But she couldn't answer at first. She was crying too hard, sucking in air like she couldn't get enough of it. Her hands clutched the blanket, white-knuckled, like it was the only thing anchoring her. I sat on the edge of the bed and pulled her against me, holding her tight, trying to make her feel the solid fact of another human body. I kept talking in a low voice, telling her she was okay, telling her I was there. I listened for any sound outside the window, for pounding, for footsteps, for anything that would explain what was happening. Her sobbing slowed, just a little. She swallowed hard, wiped at her face, and looked at me like she was afraid I wouldn't believe her. Then she spoke, the words coming out broken between breaths. "There was someone outside," she said. I felt my stomach drop. "Outside where?" She pointed, shaking, toward the window. "They were scratching at the window," she whispered, "with their fingers." For a second, I couldn't respond at all. My mind went back to the sound that had woken me up. The branch. I had decided it was a branch. I had watched the shadow of it on the wall. I had listened to it tap, then pound, and I had turned it into something normal because that was easier than believing anything else. But Brenda wasn't talking about branches. She was talking about fingers. And as she said it, the wind shifted again, and something brushed the glass. Slow this time, deliberate, like it was testing the window, like it knew we were both awake now and listening.